Hello and welcome to another edition of Currently in Quincy. I'm Joe Catalano. On today's program, we will learn what's happening at the Dorothy Quincy Homestead this season. First, though, as always, we check out the weather and the news for you. Currently in Quincy, it's hazy, it's humid, it's 78 degrees right now. We're headed for the sticky low 80s this afternoon with a chance of a pop-up thunder shower pretty much any time today or this evening as well. Another uncomfortable night for sleeping tonight, down to only about 69 degrees. And really, we can just rinse and repeat the weather forecast for the rest of this week with a chance for showers and storms every single day. Humid with conditions in the upper 70s to low 80s, and nighttime lows only in the mid to upper 60s. Very uncomfortable right through Thursday, probably into Friday as well. Things may start to break a little bit over the upcoming weekend, but until then, hazy, warm and humid with a chance for storms every single day. Again, 78 degrees in Quincy right now. Checking news for you today, City of Quincy's 18th police chief is now on the job. Mark Kennedy was sworn in during a ceremony at City Hall on Friday morning. Kennedy said he looked forward to building on past successes and continuing to support his colleagues in the future.
The current state of the Quincy Police Department is strong and its future is bright. My command staff and I will continue to push forward, to innovate, build coalitions, and look for ways to stay ahead of the curve. We will continue to provide the best police services to the citizens of Quincy while embracing the guardian mindset that has for decades been at our core. A few months ago, I had an incredibly vivid dream. I was here in this hall getting sworn in as the chief of police, and my dad, who passed away in 2017, walked up to shake my hand and congratulate me. He told me how proud he was, and then he said, this is the easy part. Now what are you going to do with it? You have to earn it every day. For those of you who knew my father, he didn't suffer fools, and he never let us rest on our laurels. I always found it a bit frustrating that when I thought I made it to the top of the mountain, my dad would point out another peak. I know he'd be proud today, and I know the Quincy Police Department will be a better place because of the lessons he taught me.
The 47-year-old Kennedy is a 24-year veteran of the Quincy Police Department, having served as a lieutenant since 2017. He was the highest scorer on the civil service test. Kennedy is also an attorney. He succeeds Paul Keenan, who retired last week after a 40-year career with the Quincy Police, the past 15 as chief. City of Quincy in the process of developing a plan to comply with a state law requiring a certain amount of housing surrounding the city's 4 MBTA stations. The legislature last year passed the ordinance that sets the standards for transit-oriented development depending on the amount of MBTA service available in a given community. City of Quincy is designated as a rapid transit community because of service by subways, commuter rail, and buses. City Solicitor Jim Timmons says the particular attention is being paid to areas around the Quincy Adams station.
We meet the other requirements in terms of transit orientation. We have the ability to do something within a half mile of a T station. Now, you're all familiar with the North Quincy development, I'm sure. That was a 2016 transit-oriented development done here in Quincy, and that was really way ahead of other communities in our area. The statute here was passed 6 years later. So North Quincy's already kind of implemented as a transit-oriented district. Councilor Phelan and others are familiar with what we're doing in Wollaston, taking a look at that, and there's going to be some work done in Wollaston. Quincy Center is all established and has been for a while. And in discussions with the mayor and with the planning department, we do not want to introduce any sort of 3A compliance in Quincy Center because we don't want to give up the ability to control how things are developed there. So right now we're looking down at the Quincy Adams T station, that area. Now, Councilor Devine, Councilor Andronico, this is perhaps news to you, but we're looking. And part of what I'm here to tell you about tonight is that over the course of the summer, We're going to be looking at how things lay out down in that area, and the possibility of proposing Section 3A compliance through a transit-oriented district down near the Quincy Adams T.
Now, the state has accepted Quincy's preliminary plan to develop transit-oriented developments. A final plan must be submitted to the state by the end of the year. City Council is expected to take up the issue in September. Quincy City Clerk Nicole Crispo is urging residents to return their city census forms or risk being put on the inactive voter list. Crispo says about half of Quincy's registered voters still haven't returned their census forms.
As of now, if we were to print our voting lists for Election Day, we would have 33,000 people on the inactive list. We have 65,000 voters in our city, so almost half would be on the inactive list. We don't want that to happen. So we're this week coming up with a new card to send out asking people if they still live there, if their family is still there, if there are any changes, to just sign the card and send it back so we can update the households in our city. It's a quick little card, won't take long, but we really want to get it out there so that we have the best voter list that we can have on Election Day.
Crispo says if a voter is put on the inactive voter list, they'd be required to sign an affidavit at the polls verifying their residence before they'd be allowed to vote. She says that will result in considerably slower lines at the polls during elections. The city provides a postage-paid envelope for the return of those census forms. Well, the new radiology center at Mannett Community Health Center's North Quincy headquarters is now officially open. A ribbon-cutting ceremony was held on Friday, officially opening the new center that was unveiled recently. That new center will operate in partnership with Boston Medical Center and provide patients with high-quality X-ray and mammogram services. Funding was provided from the city's Community Development Block Grant Program, U.S. Health Resources and Services Administration, American Rescue Plan Act, Health Infrastructure Support Grants, and the Mass Development Community Health Center Grant Program. Quincy Rotary Club recently made a donation to Quincy College's Early College, High School, and Summer Youth Works programs. The $3,800 donation will go towards the purchase of snacks and other food items to be made available to the many participants in both programs that will be offered on the college campus beginning on July 10th. College President Rick DeCristofaro accepted the gift from the Rotary Club President Walter Hubley, his wife Catherine, and Rotarians Karen Smith, Leslie Bridson, and John Whitney. It's our check of news for you today. Coming up, the very latest from the Dorothy Quincy homesteads. Next. Welcome back. Promises to be a very busy season once again at the Dorothy Quincy Homestead, the corner of Hancock Street and Butler Road in Quincy. If you don't know where it is, we're going to find out all about it right now from co-chair Allison Lee and also docent John Thomas Malvesti. Welcome to both of you. Thanks for coming over.
Thank you for having us.
We're delighted to be here.
We've had folks from the homestead on the program here in the past, and we've kind of highlighted individual one event programs that have been happening. So I'm looking forward, Allison, to learning kind of a broader picture about the homestead from you, and then also about John Thomas, your experience training to become a docent to actually give tours of the homestead, right? So let's start with you, Allison, if we could.
Yes. So the Dorothy Quincy Homestead is the home of 4 generations of Quincy's. Edmund Quincy, I like to call him Edmund the First, Edmund the Second, Edmund the Third, and Edmund the Fourth. Sometimes I think our guests, our visitors, get a little confused with all 4 generations. However, it's such an important history. It's a gem for Quincy. Quincy's so lucky to have so much historic background, starting with colonial times right through the Revolutionary War. And
so we're talking pre-Revolutionary War for
this
the
is
homestead.
The homestead is pre-Revolutionary War. We do interpret the house that currently exists from 1681 through 1763, when Edmund Quincy IV sold the farm due to a financial mishap.
Okay.
So, but it begins, the story of the Quincy homestead really begins with Edmund I, who came over in 1633 aboard the Griffin.
Wow.
With Reverend John Cotton, and that was during the Great Puritan Migration, which many people have heard recently. I think there have been books published and whatnot. It's an interesting history. And so during our tour narrative, we start there at the archaeological dig from 2 years ago, and we talk about where the original homestead stood.
Which is not where it is right now, right?
It is not where it is right
Yeah.
now. No, it's not. It was moved in the late 19th century and subsequently demolished to make room for the high school, I think,
Oh, yeah, that.
What was Quincy High School.
Yeah.
So, the narrative now starts in the 1681 house that was built by Edmund Quincy II. And so he lost his first wife, and when he remarried his second wife, and she was pregnant with Edmund III,
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
he, like most women, the house is too big, I need a new house. So we don't know that that's true, but
Right.
it makes a fun story. So what we're interpreting is really from Edmund Quincy II when he built the new home in 1681, and that's what we see today.
Yes, yeah. So why isn't it called the Edmund Quincy Homestead instead
Well,
of the Dorothy Quincy Homestead?
It's actually the Quincy homestead,
Oh, okay.
but that gets confused between Josiah Quincy's house,
Ah.
which is also here in Quincy.
Yeah, over on Muirhead Street in Wollaston.
Exactly.
Okay.
So it is called the Dorothy Quincy homestead, kind of as a distinction between the two.
Gotcha.
So we're just absolutely thrilled because it's a unique piece in the country. It's one of the few historic structures that has an original 1681 structure within a later Georgian. They literally built the Georgian construction right around the original two-cell structure
Oh, okay.
that was built in 1681.
A picture actually you want to show folks
Oh,
that,
yeah,
that you
yeah,
provided.
absolutely.
Maybe you can explain a little bit about, well, this is later on, right? This is from the 1800s, but John, maybe if you could bring up that photo and we can let folks see the homestead back in the 1800s and what it
Yes.
developed into.
Okay, so what you're seeing right here is the original homestead. Well, the current homestead is on your left.
Okay.
And that has still some front porches and some things that were removed in the 1920s by Joseph Chandler, who did the restoration.
Okay.
On the right-hand side, you see the original homestead, and this is probably around, I think this photograph was taken around 1878
Okay.
approximately. And you'll see behind it are the barns. This property, I don't know, John, how much you remember about the quote. When they went to sell the house in 1763, how many structures were on the property?
I don't remember, but it was noted for its agriculture. It had a big garden.
Yeah.
As Edmund Quincy IV is a big horticulturist.
So
Yeah.
is that the main driveway in the middle there?
So yes, this
Okay.
driveway came right down from Hancock Street,
Yep.
and then those barns in the back. He had a wonderful apple orchard.
Oh, all right.
And
Okay.
produced many hundreds of barrels of cider annually. That was Edmund Quincy IV.
Okay.
So what we're seeing here really is the development of the homestead up to Edmund Quincy IV, and then additions and changes made by subsequent owners.
I see, okay.
One of the things I thought for Quincy residents might be interesting is that many of the street names, when I drive around, I see Alleyne Street, or it could be pronounced Allen, but it's got a Y in it, not
Yes,
Al.
yes.
And there's Greenleaf
Yep.
Street, there's Butler Road. All of those streets, everyone knows who John Adams and Franklin and Quincy, but the other names are all associated with the Dorothy Quincy homestead.
Interesting.
So those are all subsequent owners of the homestead.
see. All
And
right.
actually Butler and Butler Pond, Peter Butler was, he actually leased the property, he never owned it.
Okay.
So it's the history of Quincy is so tied to the homestead itself.
Yeah, and the story you're right, doesn't get the, headlines, if you will, that the Adams story does. It's not part of the National Park Service, right?
It's not.
It's run by a separate entity.
It is a National Historic Landmark.
Yes, yeah.
It's actually owned by the Department of Conservation and Recreation of the state of Massachusetts, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. However, it's run as a historic property and was originally owned by the National Society of the Colonial Dames in Massachusetts.
Right, yeah.
So now we're in an agreement with the state where we run it as a museum property.
Yes.
But they actually own the land and the structure itself, and we
Okay.
work in cooperation. And I just want to take this moment to thank the City of Quincy, especially the City of Quincy's Preservation Commission. They have been so generous over the years, helping to provide funding for restoration and preservation of this structure. They really have been a wonderful partner, community partner to us, and so we're so happy that this year we're expanding our hours for our tours and providing more tours, and that's why we have John here today, because he's representing a student-docent program.
Yes.
But before we get to that,
Yeah.
I don't know if I got through everything I wanted to say, but I do want to just talk briefly about Dorothy, where we have Independence Day coming up, and we're going to be
Yes.
celebrating this Saturday, July 1st.
Yes.
Mayor Koch is coming to do a proclamation, a reading of the Declaration of Independence.
Okay.
And we're going to be offering free ice cream. We're praying that there's no rain and that the community of Quincy can come out and hear that. We've hired a fife and drum player to
Really?
entertain. Yep.
Okay.
Okay, so that's going to be a fun event. But we are doing everything we can to try to make the homestead a little bit more accessible
Yes.
to the public. So I am the curator, or not the curator, the collections manager. So my responsibility at the homestead is the objects that are within the homestead.
Big
and-
responsibility.
And the interpretation.
Yes. Some of them you have brought with you this morning.
I have.
Yes.
So one of the things I wanted to show is that, when I learned about the American history, I knew who John Hancock was. I never really thought about, well, who was John Hancock married to? Who's Dorothy? Who's
Well, everybody
this
knows he was
Dorothy?
the first governor of Massachusetts, right?
He was the first president of the First Continental Congress
Yeah.
and Second Continental Congress, very famously, largest signature on the Declaration of
Exactly.
Independence.
So the king can read it without his spectacles, right? And so the story goes. Yeah.
So who is Dorothy? Well, I will say this. Dorothy is an educated woman.
Mm-hmm.
She can read and write, which was not always the case during that period in time. And she and John actually got married in 1775 in Fairfield, Connecticut. She witnessed in 1775 at the Battle of Lexington and Concord. She witnessed the battle.
Wow.
And she actually went out and helped the wounded. John had to flee with other patriots down to Connecticut and then to Pennsylvania.
Well, because he would have been killed had he not, right?
Had he
Yes.
not, exactly. So at the homestead, one of the last rooms that we go into, we talk about Dorothy and John, their love story, the brief infatuation she had with Aaron Burr. That's part of, so
Always some scandal.
always some scandal. So we try to make the tour interesting from a, accurate from a historic
course,
perspective,
right.
but interesting with stories about the people.
Relatable, right?
Relatable.
To make them human.
Relatable.
Yeah.
So what I brought today, because
Yeah.
I did want to focus on Dorothy, because she was a strong, independent woman who did so much for our country,
Yep.
supporting John, and also just the fight for independence. This is her little shoe. This is a gold silk shoe
Wow.
with a wonderful white kitten heel. And the reason I brought this object is we know this belonged to Dorothy because this descended. Dorothy and John had no well, they had 2 children, neither one of them lived to adulthood.
okay.
So they really didn't have descendants. But she had plenty of cousins. I mean, she had a large family.
Right, right.
So a lot of the artifacts that are at the homestead that can be attributed to John or Dorothy are specifically donated by family members.
Oh, I see.
Because they descended, like our chariot, like the John Hancock's chariot.
Yes, we have a photo of that too.
Oh yeah, so
folks.
if you show that, you
we couldn't roll that up Washington Street
Yeah,
into
no.
our parking lot today.
No, you couldn't.
No,
and
but
that's
we do have a photo of it. Yeah.
That's a great. So you can just picture her in her little kitten heel, trying to step up into her chariot,
And there it is.
and there it is. There's the chariot. And this was generously restored with funds given to us from the Quincy Historic, the Preservation Society.
Very nice.
Yeah, commission.
Very nice.
And then we also have, this is John Hancock Jr. This is their son's little shoe.
Okay.
Now, he passed away. He died in a skating accident when he was only
Just
8
up
years
a little
old.
bit higher, Allison?
A little
There you go.
higher?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, so this
Very good,
shows
yeah.
this little, his
A
little
skating
brocade
accident
shoe.
on Butler's Pond, perhaps?
No, they
okay.
were living in Boston
Oh.
at the time in the governor's mansion.
Okay.
And so, yeah. they
Interesting.
go. And then these are purportedly, and when I use purported or family tradition, these are his little gloves.
Okay.
So the homestead does have some original artifacts.
Yeah, I see. Yeah.
And
Thank you for bringing those.
we love to tell the story of Dorothy and John and all 4 Edmund Quincy's. But I don't want to take up too much time. I want to make sure you have time for John, because John was part of our student docent program, and it was a wonderful program, and it was in concert with the city of Quincy.
I
They
see.
have been
Okay.
wonderful, and the city of Quincy is paying these docents, these students,
Yes.
to learn and become, interpreters of the
Okay.
homestead. So
So-
John,
New this year, right, was the docent program?
it was new this year.
Yeah, at the homestead. It's been around for a while before that.
Yeah, our docent program was basically made up of volunteers from the NSCDMA, and also we are always encouraging. If there's anyone out there listening right
Yeah.
now that's a Quincy resident and they have a passion for history and they have time on their hands,
Okay.
we welcome members of the community to help become volunteers.
good to
Matter
know.
of fact, 2 or 3 of our prized docents, people that are the most enthusiastic, are Quincy community members.
Okay. Good
And
to know.
so we're thrilled to have John, who just graduated from North Quincy High
Oh,
School.
congratulations.
Thank you.
And he'll be attending BU this fall.
Yep.
Very good.
And-
How did you find out about the docent program at the homestead, John?
So I found out about it in school.
Okay.
So the docent program basically trains high schoolers to be museum tour guides. Now the docent program actually started at the MFA.
Oh.
So they'd bring in high schoolers from both high schools to the MFA to present on particular paintings. Then after the pandemic, the program shifted gears to focus on local historical resources, of which there are many, so it wasn't a difficult pivot to make.
You were lucky, right? You were
Yeah.
in Quincy, so you had your choice. Yeah.
Right, yeah, very lucky. So I started in 2021, and that year they actually brought artifacts to the schools from the Historical Society to present on. For example, they had tools used by granite workers and
Okay,
other
sure.
things. And then in 2022, this past year, we got to work at the homestead and learn how to guide people through the homestead, which is fun because there's a lot of history in that building.
As I'm learning. Yeah.
Yep. Now, there's 2 big things that the docent program teaches its students. The first is not to overwhelm the guests with information, as they call it, fire hosing them.
Right.
Now, there are hundreds of facts you could tell people, even about a specific room in the homestead. So you want to, but you only have a certain amount of time, so
Right.
you want to narrow it down to the most interesting anecdotes and stories
Absolutely.
and whatnot. The second thing is what they call meaning making. You want to cater the information to the audience you're with. So if you're given a tour to an author who's researching for his book on John Hancock, you're going to want to focus on John Hancock, and also that author is going to be really receptive to any information you have. If you're given a tour to a group of high schoolers, not all of which might be interested in history, you're going to give a different tour, and you're going to have to connect it to their interests. An example of this is when we have a room in the homestead. It's Henry Flint's bedchamber, and Henry Flint was Edmund Quincy IV's uncle,
Yes.
correct? He was a tutor at Harvard. And in his room, on his bed, we have a bed warmer and a foot warmer. And so when I take guests up there, I try to connect the information to their lives by talking about how those 2 devices were really their only defenses against the cold. So think about how cold winters are now, and the fact that that's all they had.
Right.
So that's just an example of how you can connect the information to modern day audiences'
Yes.
experiences.
Yeah.
Yep.
Now, have you always been interested in history?
Yes, I love storytelling, and I love stories, and I see history as just one long story that we're a part of and that's still unfolding. So,
Yeah. So what do you plan to study in college?
Well, filmmaking, actually.
really?
Film and TV production. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So I'm thinking documentaries about
Documentaries,
things
yep.
in history?
Yep, all kinds of stories. Yep.
Interesting. Have you done some of that work already at North Quincy High?
Yes, I've done work at North Quincy High. I've done certain historical projects. Like I did an interview with Dr. Yakubian,
Really?
who's the basis for the mascot, and I talked about his experiences and his family his family's experiences in Armenia during the genocide
Sure,
and
yeah.
whatnot, and kind of got his story and the story of Quincy when he was growing up and what the community was like then. And I've also made some short films with North Quincy too.
Yeah. Well, good for you. Congratulations on
Thank
that,
you.
and good luck in your future endeavors, too. We are out of time, speaking of shortness of time. But, Allison, just quickly, when is the homestead open this season?
So if you go to the website nscdma.org, you will find our full schedule.
Okay.
It's usually the first and third Saturdays
Okay.
from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. And then one of our fun events coming up in October is our first candlelight tour. We're hoping to be open at night
Oh,
to
okay.
give people a feeling for what it was like for colonial
Yeah,
lighting.
there was no electricity back then, so yeah.
There's no electricity.
Okay. And again, this coming Saturday, the mayor reading the Declaration of Independence and free ice cream.
Free ice cream.
Okay. Thank you both. Really appreciate the
you.
opportunity
Thank
to
you
learn
for
about
having
this
us.
and share your story. You're very welcome.
you
Just
for
enough
having
time to check the forecast for you for the rest of the day. Today, kind of what you see is what you get out there. Hazy sunshine, warm and humid, maybe some storms. Ditto, ditto, ditto for the rest of this week. It's going to be unsettled right through at least Friday with daytime highs in the upper 70s, low 80s, nighttime lows in the uncomfortable upper 60s. So get ready for summertime, folks. Thanks again to Allison Lee, John Thomas Malvesti for joining us here in the program. Thanks to our crew. Thank you for watching. Friday here in the show, we're going to learn about Quincy Bay Race Week this week. Meantime, check out our website. It's qatv.org. All our latest programs are there. There's news and information, video on demand, live streaming, and more. For all of us here at QATV, I'm Joe Catalano. Have a great week.